There is a frequency that has been building for years, and you have felt it even if you could not name it. It is in the restlessness that wakes you at 3 in the morning with no clear cause. It is in the way conversations that once satisfied you now feel hollow. The way institutions you once trusted now seem to be speaking a language you have outgrown. Something enormous is shifting, and the part of you that senses it is not paranoid, not anxious, not broken. That part of you is the most accurate instrument you own, and what it is detecting is real. But here is where most people get this wrong. They hear the phrase collective shift, and they picture some external event, some grand cosmic calendar flipping to a new page, some wave of light descending from above to fix everything. They wait, they watch, they consume content about ascension timelines and astrological ages, and they treat the shift like weather, something that happens to them. And while they wait, the actual shift, the one that matters, the one that is already underway, moves through them unnoticed. Because the collective shift is not something arriving, it is something emerging. And it is emerging through the nervous systems, the perceptions, the daily choices of individual human beings. Through you, not metaphorically, structurally. And what you need to watch out for is not some dark force or cosmic trap. What you need to watch out for is the very real possibility that you will feel this shift moving through you and misidentify it as something going wrong. Let me show you what I mean. In 1964, a physicist named John Bell published a theorem that would quietly rearrange the foundations of reality, though almost no one noticed at the time. Bell's theorem and the experiments that later confirmed it demonstrated something that still unsettles physicists who think carefully about it. It showed that particles that have once interacted remain connected in a way that transcends space. Measure the spin of one particle here, and its entangled partner instantaneously reflects a correlated state, no matter how far away it is. Not after a signal travels between them. Not after some hidden variable communicates the result. Instantaneously. As if distance, that most fundamental feature of the physical world, simply does not apply at a certain level of reality. This is not metaphor. This is experimental fact, confirmed repeatedly, most rigorously in Alain Aspect's experiments in the early 1980s, and refined further in tests that closed every known loophole by 2015. The universe, at its most fundamental level, is non-local. Things that appear separate are not. The space between them is real at one level of description and completely irrelevant at another. Now hold that. Do not rush past it. Because this is not just a fact about subatomic particles. It is a fact about the nature of the fabric from which everything, including you, including every person you will never meet, is woven. When we talk about a collective shift, we are not talking about a trend. We are not talking about a cultural moment or a generational mood. We are talking about the possibility that human consciousness, which arises from and participates in this non-local fabric, can undergo phase transitions. Not individual awakenings happening to occur at the same time, but a genuine shift in the field itself, the shared substrate from which individual minds emerge. And there is a precise analogy from physics that illuminates what this looks like. Consider water. At 99 degrees Celsius, water is still liquid. It is hot. It is agitated. Its molecules are moving with tremendous energy, but it is still fundamentally organized as a liquid. Its structure, the way its molecules relate to each other, remains in the liquid phase. Then one more degree arrives. Not a dramatic addition. 1 degree, and the entire organizational structure transforms. The water does not become hot or liquid. It becomes something else entirely. Steam, a phase transition. The components are the same molecules of H2O they always were. What changed is the pattern of relationship between them. This is what a collective shift actually is. Not new humans arriving. Not better information being distributed. Not even more people meditating, though that may be part of the mechanism. It is the relational pattern between consciousnesses reaching a critical threshold and reorganizing into a fundamentally different structure. The elements stay the same. You are still you. Your neighbor is still your neighbor. But the way awareness relates to itself through all of you undergoes a phase change. And here is the part that will matter most to your daily life. Phase transitions are not comfortable. They are not smooth. The moment before water becomes steam is the moment of maximum energetic agitation. The molecules are vibrating at their most intense. If a water molecule could feel, the moment just before the phase transition would feel like everything is falling apart. Because from within the liquid phase, the dissolution of liquid structure does not feel like transformation. It feels like destruction. Read that again with your own life as the reference point. The anxiety you cannot source to any specific problem. The relationships that suddenly feel like they do not fit. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because the frequency you are operating at has shifted and the old resonance patterns no longer match. The career that looks fine on paper but feels like wearing someone else's clothes. If you have been doing everything right and reality still has not shifted, this is the one thing nobody has told you. There is something underneath all of it, quietly running the show. I am hosting a free live transmission where I walk you through exactly what that is and how to finally shift it at the root. The link to register is in the description below. Save your seat. The moment you see this, you will understand why you could not see it before. The deep, persistent sense that the rules you were taught about how life works are not just incomplete but somehow inverted. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. These are signs that you are in the agitation phase of a transition. The molecules of your identity are vibrating at a frequency that the old structure cannot contain. And what you must watch out for is the almost irresistible temptation to interpret this agitation as a problem to be solved, a disorder to be treated, a crisis to be managed back into the old equilibrium. Because that is what every system around you is designed to do. The medical system will offer you a diagnosis. The self-help industry will offer you a 5-step plan to feel better. Your own ego, that magnificent pattern maintenance machine, will offer you a story about why you are failing and what you need to fix. And all of these responses, however well-intentioned, share one assumption: that the previous state was correct, and this disruption is a deviation from it. But what if the previous state was the deviation? What if the discomfort you are feeling is not a malfunction, but a calibration? What if the collective shift is not something you need to prepare for, but something your deepest self has been preparing you for your entire life? If this is resonating with something deep in you right now, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe so we can continue this exploration together. There is a concept in the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead that most people have never encountered, but that speaks directly to this moment. Whitehead, writing in the early 20th century, proposed what he called process philosophy, a framework in which reality is not made of static things, but of events, of processes of becoming. In his view, every moment of experience is a creative act. The universe does not consist of matter that occasionally changes. It consists of change that occasionally stabilizes into what we call matter. The fundamental unit of reality is not the particle. It is the occasion of experience. This sounds abstract until you apply it to what is happening right now. If reality is fundamentally processual, fundamentally a flow of becoming, then what we call stability is actually a pattern of repetition. A thing appears solid because the same process repeats itself with such consistency that it looks like a permanent object. Your identity feels fixed because the same patterns of thought, reaction, and perception repeat so reliably that they appear to be a self. The institutions of your society feel permanent because the same agreements, assumptions, and power structures reproduce themselves so faithfully that they appear to be the natural order. But a phase transition is precisely the moment when the pattern of repetition breaks. When the process that has been cycling in one configuration reaches a threshold and reorganizes into a new pattern. The old repetition does not just change speed or intensity, it changes kind. And in the gap between the old pattern dissolving and the new pattern stabilizing, there is a period that has no name in most frameworks. It is not the old, and it is not yet the new. It is pure becoming without a stable form to land in. You are in that gap. Not just you personally, though you may be. The collective field of human consciousness is in that gap, and the felt experience of being in that gap is precisely the cluster of sensations that most people are currently reporting and that most systems are currently misdiagnosing. Let me be specific about what the agitation phase looks like, because naming it precisely is the difference between being destabilized by it and navigating it with awareness. The first signature is a dissolution of certainty. Things you were sure of become strangely translucent. Not wrong exactly, but thin. Beliefs you held without questioning them start to feel like costumes rather than skin. You might notice this as a sudden inability to care about things that previously motivated you. A promotion that would have thrilled you 2 years ago now feels irrelevant. A political position you once argued passionately now seems like a game played on a board you no longer recognize. This is not apathy. Apathy is a collapse of energy. This is a withdrawal of investment from structures that your deeper intelligence has already recognized as belonging to the old phase. The second signature is heightened sensitivity. Your nervous system becomes more porous. You feel other people's emotional states more acutely. Crowds become overwhelming in a way they did not used to be. News cycles do not just inform you, they land in your body like physical impacts. You might find yourself needing more silence, more solitude, more time in nature, not because you are becoming antisocial, but because your system is recalibrating its filters. The old filters were designed for the old phase. They screened out what the old pattern deemed irrelevant. As the pattern dissolves, the filters dissolve with it. And suddenly you are receiving more signal than your current processing capacity can handle. I want to pause here and ask you something. Which of these signatures have you been experiencing most intensely? Drop it in the comments below, because I think you will find that naming it out loud, even in a single sentence, changes your relationship to it. The third signature is temporal disorientation. Time feels different. Some days collapse into what feels like minutes. Other hours stretch into what feels like weeks. You lose track of what day it is, not because you are distracted, but because the linear time framework, which is itself a feature of a particular phase of consciousness, is loosening its grip. This is consistent with what we know about how the brain constructs the experience of time. Time perception is not a passive recording. It is an active construction performed by neural networks that are themselves responsive to the state of consciousness operating through them. Change the state of consciousness, and you change the felt texture of time. The fourth signature, and this is the one that frightens people most, is the cracking of identity. You look in the mirror, and the person looking back feels like a character you have been playing rather than who you actually are. Roles that once defined you, parent, professional, partner, citizen, start to feel like labels stuck to the outside of something much larger and less nameable. You might experience this as a kind of existential vertigo, a sense that the ground of your selfhood is not as solid as you assumed. And in a culture that treats a stable sense of self as the hallmark of mental health, this cracking can be genuinely terrifying. But here is what I want you to understand. This cracking is not pathology, it is accuracy. The self you constructed, it was always a pattern of repetition, not a fixed entity. It was always a process pretending to be a thing. What is happening now is that the pretense is becoming transparent. You are not losing yourself. You are seeing through the construction to what was always underneath it. And what is underneath it is not nothing. It is the awareness that was doing the constructing all along. This is where the quantum parallel becomes more than analogy and starts to function as direct insight. In quantum mechanics, there is a phenomenon called decoherence. Decoherence is the process by which a quantum system, which exists in superposition, in a state of multiple simultaneous possibilities, loses its quantum behavior and appears to collapse into a single classical state. This happens when the system interacts with its environment in a way that entangles its quantum information with so many environmental degrees of freedom that the interference patterns, the signature of quantum possibility, become undetectable. In simpler terms, decoherence is how the infinite becomes the finite, how possibility becomes actuality, how the open field of what could be narrows into the single track of what appears to be. Now, your identity, the one that is cracking, is a decoherence pattern. It is what happened when the infinite field of your consciousness interacted with the environment of your culture, your family, your language, your trauma, your education, and entangled itself so thoroughly with those environmental factors that the full spectrum of who you could be became invisible, and only one version, one classical self, appeared to be real. The collective shift is a recoherence, not a return to some previous state, but a loosening of the environmental entanglement that locked consciousness into one narrow expression. As the collective field shifts, the decoherence patterns that maintained your fixed identity and the fixed identities of institutions, nations, economic systems, and belief structures begin to dissolve. The superposition that was always there underneath begins to show through, and this is simultaneously the most liberating and the most disorienting thing that can happen to a human being. Let me tell you what this looks like at the collective level, because the individual experience I have been describing is not happening in isolation. It is a fractal expression of a pattern occurring at every scale simultaneously. Look at institutions. not with the lens of politics or ideology, but with the lens of phase transition. Every major institutional structure on this planet, governance, finance, medicine, education, media, religion, is currently exhibiting the same pattern. The pattern of repetition that maintained them is breaking, not reforming, not evolving within its current structure. Breaking. The old agreements that held these systems together are becoming transparent. People can see through them now in a way they could not before. And the response from within these systems is exactly what you would expect from a structure trying to maintain coherence during a phase transition. Increased rigidity, amplified control, desperate reassertion of the old rules. This is not strength. This is the last vibrational frequency of the old phase before it gives way. Consider what is happening with information itself. For most of human history, information was scarce and controlled. A small number of institutions decided what was true, what was important, what was worth knowing, and distributed that curated reality to a passive population. That structure is not just weakening, it has already collapsed. The old gatekeepers are still standing at the gates, but the walls on either side have dissolved. Information now moves through networks that no institution controls, at speeds that no editorial process can match, in volumes that no human mind can fully process. This is not just a technological change. It is a change in the epistemological structure of collective consciousness. The way humanity knows what it knows has undergone a phase transition, and the chaos, the misinformation, the polarization, the sense that no one can agree on basic reality anymore. This is not a sign that the system is failing. It is the turbulence of a new pattern trying to emerge from the dissolution of the old one. The same pattern is visible in the economy. The financial structures that have organized human labor and resource distribution for centuries are exhibiting the characteristic agitation of a system approaching phase transition. The concentration of wealth is not just an inequality problem. It is a sign that the old pattern is intensifying its own logic to the point of absurdity, which is exactly what systems do just before they reorganize. The emergence of decentralized currencies, the questioning of growth-based economics, the rise of alternative exchange systems. These are not fringe movements. They are early crystallization points of the new phase, the first ice crystals forming in water that is about to freeze into a new structure. Though in this case the transition is not toward rigidity, but toward a more fluid, more distributed, more coherent pattern of exchange. And here is what you must understand about your role in this. You are not a spectator. The collective shift is not a show you are watching. It is a process you are participating in, whether you are aware of it or not. Because the collective field is not something separate from you that influences you from the outside. You are a node in the field. Your consciousness is a localized expression of the field. When the field shifts, it shifts through you. And when you shift, the field shifts through you. This is not inspirational language. This is the structural implication of non-locality. If the fundamental fabric of reality is non-local, if separation is a feature of one level of description but not of the deeper level, then the idea that your individual inner state is irrelevant to the collective is not just wrong. It is physically incoherent. Your inner state is the collective, expressing itself at your particular coordinates. Which means the most important question is not what is the collective shift and when will it arrive. The most important question is what is the shift asking of you, specifically, right now, in the body and mind and life you are actually living. And this is where we move from understanding to practice. Because understanding a phase transition intellectually does not help you navigate one. What helps you navigate one is learning to hold a very specific inner posture, one that most of human conditioning has trained you to avoid. The posture is this: remaining present in the space between the old pattern and the new one without rushing to fill it. Think about what your conditioning does when you encounter uncertainty. It immediately reaches for a framework, a story, an explanation, a plan, a prediction, a label. Anything to close the gap between not knowing and knowing. This is the decoherence reflex. It is the mechanism by which consciousness collapses its own possibility space into a single fixed state. And in ordinary times, this reflex is useful. It allows you to function. It gives you a stable self and a stable world to navigate. But during a phase transition, this reflex becomes the primary obstacle, because the gap between the old and the new is not a problem. It is the transition itself, the fertile void, the creative chaos, the space of pure becoming that Whitehead described. This is where the new pattern gestates. If you rush to close it, if you grab the first available framework and use it to reconstruct a sense of certainty, you are not navigating the transition. You are aborting it. You are using the old phase's tools to prevent the new phase from emerging. And this is exactly what you need to watch out for. Not external threats, not cosmic adversaries, not dark timelines. The thing to watch out for is your own reflex to resolve the discomfort of transformation by retreating into a premature certainty. You see this everywhere right now. People who feel the shift and immediately grab a conspiratorial framework to explain it. People who feel the shift and immediately grab a spiritual framework to transcend it. People who feel the shift and immediately grab a political framework to fight it. People who feel the shift and immediately grab a psychological framework to diagnose it. Every one of these responses has the same structure. The uncertainty is intolerable, so consciousness collapses itself into the first available fixed state. And every one of these responses, however sophisticated, prevents the actual transition from completing itself. The alternative is not passivity. It is not doing nothing. It is a very active, very demanding practice of remaining in the open state while the reorganization happens. It is learning to be the space in which the transition occurs rather than the thing that resists it. Tell me in the comments, what is the old pattern you keep catching yourself reaching for? What is the framework or identity or certainty that your mind tries to reconstruct the moment the groundlessness gets intense? Naming it is the first step in loosening its grip. For those wanting the complete framework behind what we have been exploring, listen to this. Have you spent years chasing manifestation, visualizing, affirming, raising your vibration, only to watch the same patterns repeat? Every traditional method assumes the same thing, that you are separate from what you want. That separation was never real. You were chasing a signal you were already broadcasting. Beyond the frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery walks through all 9 frequencies, from the dense transmissions trapping you, through the ascending currents, to the master frequencies where consciousness becomes the field. Every method you tried sent a signal outward. This one tunes the signal you already are. Every day you delay, your nervous system broadcasts the same old signal, and breaking free gets harder. So move on it tonight. The link is in the pinned comment below. Now let us return to the practice that can help you hold this open space. There is a practice that can help you develop this capacity, and it is deceptively simple. It works directly with the nervous system's response to uncertainty, which is where the real resistance to the shift lives. Not in your beliefs, not in your thoughts. In your body's deep, precognitive response to the unknown. Here is what I want you to try. Not later. Not when conditions are ideal. Now, or the next time you notice the agitation I have been describing. When you feel the groundlessness, the disorientation, the cracking of certainty. Instead of reaching for an explanation, bring your attention to the physical sensation in your body. Not the story about the sensation itself. Usually it will be in the chest or the solar plexus or the throat. A tightness, a vibration, a sense of falling, a heat. Place your attention on that sensation as precisely as you can. Feel its edges, feel its texture, feel whether it pulses or holds steady, and then do something that will feel counterintuitive. Instead of trying to release it or resolve it or understand it, breathe into it. Not to change it, to be with it. Inhale slowly and imagine the breath moving directly into the center of that sensation. Exhale slowly and let the breath soften the space around the sensation without trying to make the sensation go away. What you are doing is training your nervous system to remain in an open state in the presence of the unknown. You are interrupting the decoherence reflex at the somatic level, which is the only level where it can actually be interrupted. Thoughts about being open do not help. The body's learned capacity to remain open in the presence of uncertainty is what helps. And this capacity, like any capacity, develops through practice. Do this for 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes of being with the groundlessness without narrating it, without resolving it, without reaching for the next framework. And notice what happens. Not what you think should happen. What actually happens. Most people, when they first try this, discover something surprising. The sensation they were interpreting as anxiety or crisis or breakdown, when they actually stay with it without the story, turns out to be energy, raw, undifferentiated energy. Not negative, not positive, just intense, just alive, just moving. The suffering was never in the sensation. The suffering was in the story the mind wrapped around the sensation to try to make it mean something within the old framework. This is the micro-level experience of the collective shift. The energy moving through you is the same energy moving through the collective field. It is the agitation of the phase transition. And when you learn to be with it without collapsing it into a story, you become a node of coherence in the field. You become a point where the new pattern can begin to crystallize. Not because you figured out what the new pattern is, but because you stopped insisting that it conform to the old one. Now I want to take this deeper, because there is a layer to the collective shift that most discussions of it miss entirely, and it has to do with the relationship between individual coherence and field effects. In the 1970s and 80s, a series of studies examined what happens to measurable social indicators when a relatively small number of people in a given area engage in coherent meditative practice simultaneously. The findings, whatever you think of their methodology, pointed to something remarkable. Crime rates, accident rates, hospital admissions, and other markers of social stress showed statistically significant decreases during the periods of coherent group practice and returned to baseline when the practice stopped. The researchers proposed a field effect model that coherent consciousness in a small number of individuals could influence the larger field in which all individuals are embedded. The specific mechanism remains debated, but the underlying principle is consistent with everything we know about non-local systems. In any non-local system, a change in coherence at one point affects the coherence of the whole, not through a signal traveling from point A to point B, through the inherent interconnectedness of the system itself. If consciousness is a non-local field, and the evidence from quantum mechanics suggests that the substrate from which consciousness arises is exactly that, then individual coherence is not a personal luxury. It is a collective contribution. This reframes the entire question of what you are supposed to do during a collective shift. You are not supposed to figure out the right ideology. You are not supposed to choose the right side. You are not supposed to predict the right timeline. You are supposed to become coherent. To bring your own system, your own nervous system, your own perceptual apparatus, your own field of consciousness, into a state of coherence that contributes to the emergence of the new pattern rather than the perpetuation of the old one. And coherence in this context has a very specific meaning. It does not mean feeling good. It does not mean being positive. It does not mean having the right beliefs. Coherence means that the different levels of your system, body, emotion, thought, awareness, are aligned and in communication with each other rather than fragmented and in conflict. Think about what incoherence looks like. Your body is sending one signal, your emotions are telling a different story, your thoughts are constructing a third narrative, and your deeper awareness is being drowned out by the noise of all three. This is the normal state of most human beings most of the time, and it is a state of internal decoherence, a state in which the full spectrum of your consciousness has collapsed into fragmented, conflicting classical states that interfere with each other destructively. Coherence is when these levels align. When your body's intelligence, your emotional truth, your mental clarity, and your deeper awareness all point in the same direction. Not because you forced them to agree, but because you stopped forcing them to disagree. Because you stopped overriding your body's signals with your mind's stories. Because you stopped suppressing your emotions with your mental frameworks. Because you stopped drowning out your deeper awareness with the noise of your conditioned reactions. And this brings us to perhaps the most important and most uncomfortable aspect of the collective shift. The shift is not asking you to add something. It is asking you to stop doing something. It is asking you to stop maintaining the patterns that keep you in the old phase. This is uncomfortable because those patterns feel like you. Your habitual reactions, your familiar emotional responses, your well-practiced mental frameworks, your reliable identity, these are the patterns of repetition that constitute your sense of self. And the shift is asking these patterns to dissolve, not to be replaced by better patterns, to dissolve, to give way to the open space from which new patterns can emerge. This is why the shift feels like loss, because it is loss. It is the loss of the familiar self, the loss of the known world, the loss of the certainty that you understood how things work. And no amount of spiritual language can make this loss painless. It is a real death. Not of you, but of the version of you that was a product of the old phase. And here is the paradox that sits at the center of this entire process. The you that is afraid of this death is the pattern that needs to die. And the you that can witness this death, the awareness that can observe the dissolution of its own patterns without being destroyed by the dissolution, that is the you that survives the transition. That is the you that is native to the new phase. It was always there, underneath the patterns, but the patterns were so dense, so loud, so convincing that it could not be heard. The collective shift is the thinning of those patterns on a species-wide scale. And your individual work, the work that no one else can do for you, is to cooperate with that thinning rather than resist it. Let me give you a concrete way to think about this that might help when the disorientation is at its most intense. Imagine you have spent your entire life in a room with walls painted to look like a landscape. Mountains, rivers, sky, all painted with extraordinary skill on the interior walls of a room you have never left. You have organized your entire life in relation to this painted landscape. You have navigated by its painted mountains. You have oriented yourself by its painted sky. You have built your sense of direction, your sense of place, your sense of self in relation to features that were always representations, never the things themselves. Now imagine the paint begins to peel, not all at once, in patches. First, a corner of sky flakes away, and you see bare wall behind it. Then a section of mountain dissolves, and you see plaster. Your first response is alarm. The world is falling apart. Your second response is denial. You patch the paint, you look away from the bare spots. You insist the landscape is real. Your third response, if you are fortunate, is curiosity. You approach the bare wall. You touch it, and you realize that behind the painted landscape there is a door, and behind the door is the actual landscape, the actual mountains, the actual sky. Vaster, more complex, more alive than anything the paint could represent. The disorientation of the shift is the paint peeling, the institutions losing credibility, the identities cracking, the certainties dissolving. These are patches of paint falling away. And what is being revealed is not nothing. It is the reality that the paint was covering. A reality more coherent, more interconnected, more intelligent than the representation could convey. But you cannot see the door while you are busy repainting the walls. This is what I mean when I say the shift requires you to stop doing something rather than start doing something. The primary action is cessation, ceasing to maintain the painted landscape, ceasing to reinforce the patterns that keep the old phase in place, ceasing to narrate your experience through frameworks that belong to a reality you are in the process of outgrowing. And this cessation is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice, a moment-to-moment practice, because the patterns are deeply conditioned and they will reassert themselves constantly. You will wake up in the morning and the old self will boot up like an operating system, loading its familiar programs of worry, planning, judging, defending, seeking. And the practice is not to fight these programs. It is to notice them, to see them as programs rather than as reality, to feel the energy they consume and to gently, persistently withdraw your investment from them. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without backsliding, but consistently. With the patience of someone who understands that a phase transition is not an event but a process, and that the process has its own timing, its own intelligence, its own trajectory that does not need your management. It needs your cooperation. Consider coming back to this video each morning, even just the practice section, to reset your nervous system before the old programs have a chance to fully load. And if someone in your life is going through this agitation phase without understanding what it is, share this with them. That act of sharing is not just passing along information. It is an act of coherence in the field itself, because when two nodes in a non-local system recognize the same pattern, the signal strengthens for everyone connected to them. You become part of the mechanism by which the new phase crystallizes. There is one more dimension of this that I want to explore before we come to rest, because it addresses the fear that sits beneath all the other fears. The fear that the collective shift might not lead somewhere good, that the dissolution of the old might not give way to something better, that the chaos might just be chaos, with no new order on the other side. This fear is legitimate. It deserves to be honored rather than dismissed. And the honest answer is that there are no guarantees. A phase transition is genuinely open. The new pattern is not predetermined. It emerges from the conditions present at the moment of transition. And those conditions include you, include your state of consciousness, include the degree of coherence or incoherence you bring to the process. But there is something that the science of complex systems tells us about phase transitions that is genuinely reassuring. Not in a naive way, but in a deep structural way. Complex systems that undergo phase transitions do not transition into random chaos. They transition into higher orders of complexity. The new pattern is not simpler than the old one. It is more complex, more integrated, more capable of processing information and responding to its environment. This is a consistent finding across physics, chemistry, biology, and the study of complex adaptive systems. When a system reaches the limits of its current organizational pattern and undergoes a phase transition, the new pattern that emerges is characterized by greater coherence at a higher level of complexity. Water becoming steam is more energetically free. Simple molecules becoming living cells is more organizationally complex. Individual neurons becoming a brain is more informationally integrated. The direction of phase transitions in complex systems is consistently toward greater integration, greater freedom, greater capacity. There is no reason to assume that the phase transition of human consciousness would be an exception to this universal pattern. And there is every reason to believe, based on the trajectory of the process so far, that what is emerging is a form of collective consciousness that is more integrated, more coherent, more capable of holding complexity without fragmenting into opposition than anything that has come before. But, and this is the crucial but, this outcome is not automatic. It depends on the quality of consciousness that participates in the transition. It depends on whether enough nodes in the field, enough individual human beings, can maintain coherence during the agitation phase, rather than collapsing into the reactive patterns that would drag the system back into the old configuration or into genuine chaos. This is your responsibility. Not to save the world, not to fix the system, not to figure out the right answer. Your responsibility is to remain coherent, to stay present, to keep your nervous system open and your awareness clear during the most disorienting passage humanity has ever navigated. To be a point of stillness in the turbulence. Not because you are special, because you are here, because you are a node in the field, because the field shifts through you whether you consent to it or not, and the quality of your participation matters. So when the groundlessness comes, and it will come, do not reach for the nearest certainty. Breathe into the open space. Let the old patterns dissolve without rushing to replace them. Trust the intelligence of the process, even when your mind cannot see where it is going. The same intelligence that turns a seed into a forest without consulting a blueprint. The same intelligence that organizes 100 trillion cells into a functioning body without a management team. That intelligence is operating in the collective shift. It does not need your direction. It needs your cooperation. And cooperation, in this context, looks like this. It looks like feeling the fear and staying present anyway. It looks like watching your certainties dissolve and not grabbing for new ones. It looks like letting your identity be fluid without panicking. It looks like treating the discomfort of transformation as information rather than as evidence of failure. It looks like being honest about what you do not know. It looks like being kind, not as a strategy, but as the natural expression of a system that is no longer organized around defense. The collective shift is here. It is not coming. It is not someday. It is the texture of your experience right now, the strange electricity in the air, the sense that the old world is becoming translucent, the feeling that something enormous is trying to be born through the very fabric of your daily life. And what it means for you is not something I can tell you, because the new pattern has not finished emerging, and its specific form at your coordinates is yours to discover. What I can tell you is that the most important thing you can do is not to look for the shift outside yourself. It is to notice that the shift is already happening inside you, in the restlessness, in the sensitivity, in the cracking, in the groundlessness, in the strange, unnameable sense that you are becoming something you do not yet have a word for. That sense is not a malfunction. It is the most accurate reading of reality your system has ever produced. Trust it. Stay with it. Breathe into it, and let the old paint peel. The next time you feel that agitation rising, before you reach for your phone, before you reach for an explanation, before you reach for anything at all, try the practice I described. 2 minutes. Attention on the sensation. Breath into its center. No story, no resolution. Just presence. And notice what remains when you stop trying to hold the old shape together. What remains is what you have always been. And it is exactly what this moment is asking for. If this reached something in you that goes beyond the words, sit with it. Do not rush to the next video. Do not rush to the next idea. Let this one land in your body, not just your mind. And if you feel moved to share this with someone who is in the agitation phase and does not yet understand what is happening to them, that sharing is itself an act of coherence in the field. Subscribe if you want to continue this exploration together. Leave a word in the comments, whatever word arose for you while you were listening, and notice how even that small act of expression changes something in your felt sense.